In the final, frantic days before Christmas 1987, the inter-island ferries of the Philippines were the arteries of the nation. They were the lifeblood of the archipelago, packed with university students returning home for the holidays, migrant workers heading back to their provincial families, and merchants carrying gifts and goods for the festive season. The atmosphere aboard these vessels was one of weary excitement, a collective sigh of relief as the end of a long journey home drew near. On the evening of December 20th, one such ferry, the MV Doña Paz, was making its twice-weekly run from Tacloban on the island of Leyte to the capital, Manila. It was a routine 22-hour voyage, one of thousands made every year. Yet this particular journey would not end in joyful family reunions. Instead, it would descend into an unimaginable inferno, an apocalypse at sea that would claim more lives than the Titanic and etch its name in history as a monument to corporate greed and catastrophic failure. The MV Doña Paz was a vessel with a long and tired history. Originally built in Japan in 1963 as the Himayuri Maru, it was a passenger ferry that served Japanese domestic routes for 12 years. By Japanese maritime standards, it was already aging out of service when it was sold to Sulpicio Lines, a major passenger and cargo operator in the Philippines. By 1987, the ship was 24 years old and showing every sign of its age, but it remained a workhorse of the fleet, patched up and pushed into relentless service. Its official passenger capacity was listed as 1,518 people. This number, however, would prove to be a tragic and criminal fiction. In the chaotic, loosely regulated world of Filipino inter-island travel, overloading was a common and tacitly accepted practice, an open secret that boosted profits. On that fateful night, it is estimated that the Doña Paz was carrying more than 4,300 people, a staggering figure almost 3 times its legal limit. Thousands of unregistered passengers, their tickets sold illicitly by crew members for cash, crammed onto every available inch of deck space. They slept on cardboard mats in corridors, set up makeshift camps in lounges, and squeezed into every conceivable nook and cranny. The ship was not just a ferry, it was a dangerously overcrowded floating tinderbox, its population density closer to that of a refugee camp than a commercial vessel. The air was thick with the smell of people and food, and the sound was a constant hum of conversation, crying babies, and radios playing Christmas carols. The voyage began uneventfully. As night fell, the ship entered the Tablas Strait, a busy shipping lane south of Manila known for its strong currents. The weather was fair, and the sea was calm. Most passengers, lulled by the gentle motion of the ship, were asleep. At approximately 10:30 p.m, deep in the strait, and far from the lights of any major port, the unthinkable happened. The Doña Paz collided with the MT Vector, a small coastal oil tanker. The Vector was transporting a massive, highly volatile cargo, 8,800 barrels of gasoline and other petroleum products. The impact was catastrophic. It tore a hole in the tanker, and in an instant, its flammable cargo spilled out like a river of liquid fire, igniting and engulfing both ships and the surrounding sea in a colossal fireball. The scene aboard the Doña Paz devolved into one of pure, primal terror. The collision was described by survivors not just as a crash, but as a violent jolt accompanied by a deafening explosion. Power was lost instantly, plunging the overcrowded ship into absolute suffocating darkness, illuminated only by the raging inferno that was now climbing up the ship's hull. Panic erupted on a biblical scale. There was no fire alarm, no organised crew response, no instructions given over a public address system. The crew, it was later discovered, were almost entirely unqualified. The captain was reportedly watching a movie in his cabin, and the junior officer on the bridge was uncertified. They were nowhere to be found. Survivors later recounted the horrifying chaos. Thousands of people, roused from sleep by the sound of the collision and the searing heat, stampeded through the pitch-black corridors. They choked on thick, acrid smoke, tripped over bodies and clawed at one another in a desperate attempt to find a way out onto the open deck. The ship's very structure became a trap. The life jackets, a last hope for survival, were found to be padlocked away in storage cabinets, and no one had the keys or the time to break them open. The choice faced by the passengers was a grim calculus of death. They could either stay on board and be roasted alive by the advancing flames, or they could jump into the water below. But the water offered no sanctuary. The ocean itself was on fire. A vast, burning slick of gasoline surrounded the ship, turning the sea into a hellscape. The heat was so intense it was said to have boiled the water. Those who jumped were often immediately engulfed in flames, their screams quickly silenced. To make the horror even more acute, the shark-infested waters of the Tablas Strait awaited anyone who managed to clear the burning slick, a final, terrifying threat in this layered nightmare. People used suitcases, benches, anything that could float as a desperate shield, jumping as far as they could to escape the burning ship, only to land in the burning sea. The official response to the disaster was virtually non-existent. The Doña Paz was not equipped with a functioning radio, and no distress call was ever sent. For an agonizing 8 hours, the Philippine maritime authorities and Coast Guard remained completely unaware that the nation's worst ever disaster at sea had even occurred. It was a failure of oversight on a staggering scale. The first rescuers were not official vessels, but local fishermen and the crew of another inter-island ship, the Don Claudio, that happened to be passing through the area hours later. They arrived to a scene from Dante's Inferno. The charred, smouldering hulks of the two ships, a vast field of debris, and the sea littered with the burned bodies of the dead. They managed to pull a small number of survivors from the water, many of whom were severely burned and clinging to floating wreckage. The human toll was staggering. Officially based on the fraudulent manifest, the death toll was recorded around 1,700, but the reality, pieced together from survivor accounts and grieving families who crowded the Sulpicio Line's offices in Manila, was far more horrific. The consensus among historians and investigators is that at least 4,386 people perished that night. Only 26 survivors were ever found, 24 from the Doña Paz and 2 from the Vector's 13-man crew. The task of identifying the victims was nearly impossible. Most bodies were either consumed by the fire or lost to the sea, and the few hundred that were recovered were often burned beyond recognition. For weeks, families held vigils at the docks, clutching photographs of their loved ones, praying for a miracle that would never come. The subsequent investigation revealed a litany of lethal failures that pointed directly to Sulpicio Lines and the owners of the Vector. The Vector was found to be operating illegally, without a license, and with an unqualified crew, effectively a phantom ship. The Doña Paz was a catalogue of deadly deficiencies, criminally overcrowded, lacking basic safety equipment like a radio and accessible life preservers, and captained by an incompetent and inattentive crew. The blame was squarely placed on both companies for their gross negligence. Yet despite these findings, the path to justice for the victims' families was long and arduous. Sulpicio Lines, a powerful and politically connected company, continued to operate. In a shocking display of impunity, they were involved in several more deadly ferry disasters in the years that followed. Initial compensation offers to the families were insultingly small. It took over a decade of legal battles for the bereaved to receive any meaningful settlement. The sinking of the MV Doña Paz remains a profoundly disturbing chapter in maritime history. It was not a disaster born of an unpredictable storm or a sudden mechanical failure. It was a man-made catastrophe, methodically constructed from greed, corruption, and a complete and utter disregard for human life. It stands as a terrifying testament to how the prioritization of profit over people can create the conditions for a tragedy of unimaginable proportions, turning a holiday voyage home into a fiery descent into one of the darkest nights the sea has ever witnessed.